Victoria fell silent at that, her gaze drifting to the scuffed stockings hanging above the hearth and the handmade paper snowflakes taped to the windows. For a moment, she looked lost in thought, as though she were seeing these simple decorations for the very first time. Then, clearing her throat, she asked, "Do you always work late during the holidays?" "Only when I have to," John admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Money's tight, especially with 2 growing kids, but we manage. They're worth every sacrifice." Victoria studied him carefully, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're a good father, John. Your kids are lucky to have you." Her words caught him off guard, and for a split second, he felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to compliments. They weren't part of his everyday life. But hearing those words from someone like Victoria meant more than he cared to admit. Before he could respond, the kettle whistled shrilly from the kitchen, breaking the moment. "Hot cocoa," he offered, forcing a smile. "It's not fancy, but it'll warm you up." "That sounds wonderful," Victoria said, following him into the cozy kitchen. As they sipped steaming mugs of cocoa together, the storm raging outside seemed worlds away. For the first time in what felt like forever, Victoria felt a strange sense of peace, a fleeting reminder of what it meant to truly connect with another person. And for John, the kindness he extended without expecting anything in return planted a seed that neither of them could have anticipated. John Harper was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, though he never complained about it. He lived in a small, weathered house at the edge of a quiet mountain town, where life moved slower but struggles felt heavier. A single father to 2 bright-eyed children. Emma, an imaginative 8-year-old who loved drawing pictures of their family, and Liam, a mischievous 5-year-old with a knack for asking endless questions. John did everything in his power to keep them happy and safe. But happiness didn't come cheap, and safety wasn't guaranteed when your paycheck barely covered rent and groceries. 3 years earlier, John's wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone. It hadn't been easy. Some days, he worked double shifts as a mechanic just to make ends meet. Other nights, he sat at the kitchen table long after the kids were asleep, staring at bills that seemed impossible to pay. Still, John refused to let despair take hold. His kids needed him, and he vowed to be strong for them no matter what. The winter of that year brought biting winds and relentless snowstorms, turning the picturesque town into a freezing battleground. On one particularly frigid December evening, John left work later than usual. The shop owner had asked him to fix one last car before closing up, and John couldn't say no. He needed every dollar he could earn. As he drove home through swirling flurries, visibility dropped so low that even the streetlights appeared dim and distant. Just as he rounded a bend near the outskirts of town, something caught his eye. A faint red glow blinking weakly against the whiteout conditions. Slowing down, John squinted through the windshield and spotted a sleek black car half buried in snow on the side of the road. Its tires spun uselessly, digging deeper into the icy slush. For a moment, John hesitated. Stopping meant risking his own safety, not to mention wasting precious time he could spend getting home to his kids. But then he thought about how terrified Emma and Liam would feel if they were stranded out here in this storm. That thought settled it. Pulling over, he grabbed a flashlight from his glove compartment and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit him like a wall, stealing his breath and stinging his cheeks. Trudging through knee-deep drifts, John made his way to the stranded vehicle. Peering inside, he saw a woman huddled behind the steering wheel, her face pale and drawn. She looked completely out of place in her tailored coat and designer scarf, like someone who belonged in a fancy city skyscraper rather than stuck on a desolate country road. Her phone lay dead beside her, its battery drained, and tears shimmered in her eyes as she clutched the steering wheel tightly. "Are you okay?" John called out, rapping gently on the window. Startled, the woman turned to look at him, relief washing over her features. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her trembling voice betrayed her. but I can't get the car unstuck." Without missing a beat, John opened the door and helped her step out onto the icy ground. "You can't stay here. It's too dangerous," he told her firmly. "Come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe." For a brief second, the woman hesitated, perhaps wary of trusting a stranger. But the sincerity in John's tone, and the fact that she had no other options, convinced her. Wrapping his coat around her shoulders, John guided her toward his old but reliable pickup truck. As they climbed inside, the heater roared to life, filling the cab with warm air. For the first time since the storm began, the woman allowed herself to relax, even if only slightly. Little did either of them know, this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. As John's truck rumbled through the snow-covered roads, the woman beside him clutched his coat tightly around her shoulders, trying to ward off the biting chill that had seeped into her bones. Her name was Victoria Langley, she told him after a moment of hesitation, though she offered little else about herself. She seemed shaken, not just from the storm, but perhaps from something deeper, something John couldn't quite put his finger on. He decided not to pry. Instead, he kept the conversation light, asking if she was warm enough and assuring her they'd find shelter soon. Victoria nodded gratefully, her breath fogging up the passenger side window as she stared out at the swirling snow. "Thank you," she murmured softly, almost to herself. "You didn't have to stop." John glanced at her briefly before returning his focus to the treacherous road ahead. "Couldn't leave you out there," he said simply, his voice steady and calm. "Not in weather like this." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like a quiet understanding. John could tell Victoria wasn't used to being helped. There was an air of independence about her, a sharpness in her gaze that suggested she was accustomed to handling things on her own. But tonight, she was vulnerable, stripped of all the armor she usually wore so effortlessly. It made her seem almost human. When they finally reached John's modest home, the porch light flickered weakly against the darkness. Snow blanketed the yard, and the roof sagged slightly under its weight. John parked the truck and turned to Victoria with an apologetic smile. "It's not much, but it's warm inside," he said. "And safe." Victoria hesitated for only a second before nodding again. As they stepped onto the creaky wooden steps, the front door swung open, revealing two small faces peering curiously from behind the screen. Emma and Liam had heard the truck pull up and were now wide awake, their pajamas rumpled and their hair sticking up in every direction. "Daddy!" Liam exclaimed, running forward and throwing his arms around John's legs. "Who's that?" "This is Miss Langley," John explained gently, ushering everyone inside. "She got stuck in the storm, so I brought her here to get warm." Emma tilted her head, studying Victoria with unabashed curiosity. "Are you a princess?" she asked suddenly, pointing to Victoria's elegant coat and polished boots. "You look like one." Victoria blinked in surprise, then laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the tiny living room. "No, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down to meet Emma's gaze. "I'm definitely not a princess." "Well, you should be," Emma declared matter-of-factly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Princesses help people, right? And Daddy helps people too, so maybe you're both secret royalty." John chuckled, shaking his head as he ushered the kids back toward the couch. "All right, bedtime negotiators. Let's give Miss Langley some space." Despite his words, he couldn't help but notice how Victoria's expression softened at Emma's innocent comment. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, nostalgia, maybe, or longing, that disappeared as quickly as it came. Once the kids were settled back in bed, though not without some playful protests, John returned to the living room to find Victoria standing by the fireplace, warming her hands. The flames cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the faint lines of exhaustion etched into her features. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than when he'd first found her stranded in the snow. "I hope you don't mind the mess," John said, gesturing vaguely to the cluttered coffee table and mismatched furniture. It's not exactly five-star accommodations. It's perfect, Victoria replied earnestly, turning to face him. Really, John, I can't thank you enough. Most people wouldn't go out of their way like this. John shrugged, brushing off her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, he said. Besides, it's Christmas soon. Kinda feels like helping others is what this time of year is all about. Years passed, and the legacy of Harper's Hope grew far beyond what John Harper or Victoria Langley could have ever imagined. What had started as a small foundation in a quiet mountain town blossomed into a nationwide network of support for struggling families. Community centers sprang up in cities and rural areas alike, offering resources, mentorship, and hope to those who needed it most. The name John Harper became synonymous with resilience, kindness, and the belief that anyone could rise above their circumstances with the right support. For John, life transformed in ways he once thought impossible. Emma and Liam grew into confident, compassionate young adults, shaped not only by their father's sacrifices, but also by the values instilled through Harper's Hope. Emma pursued a degree in social work, determined to follow in her dad's footsteps, while Liam discovered a passion for engineering, inspired by the skills he learned tinkering in the garage. Watching them thrive filled John with pride, not because they were destined for greatness, but because they carried the same heart for helping others that had driven him all these years. Victoria, too, underwent a profound transformation. Through her partnership with John, she rediscovered the humanity she'd long buried beneath boardroom tables and billion-dollar deals. She stepped back from the relentless grind of corporate life, choosing instead to dedicate herself fully to philanthropy. Her wealth continued to grow, but now it served a higher purpose, funding programs that empowered people to build better lives for themselves. Though she remained one of the richest women in the world, she no longer measured success by numbers. Instead, she found fulfillment in the smiles of grateful parents and the laughter of children whose futures had been rewritten. Their friendship deepened over time, evolving into something neither of them had expected. They weren't just colleagues or benefactor and beneficiary. They were partners in every sense of the word. Together, they traveled across the country, visiting communities touched by Harper's Hope and meeting the people whose lives had changed because of their efforts. Whether speaking at conferences, attending charity galas, or simply sharing stories over coffee, they complemented each other perfectly. Where John brought authenticity and empathy, Victoria added vision and strategy. Their combined strengths created a force capable of reshaping lives. As the years went on, John often reflected on how far he'd come. From a broke single dad working double shifts to keep food on the table, he had become a symbol of hope for thousands. But he never forgot where it all began. That snowy night when he stopped to help a stranger stranded on the side of the road. He knew none of this would have happened without Victoria's generosity and belief in him. And yet he also understood that their journey wasn't about money or fame. It was about connection. About seeing someone else's humanity and choosing to act. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of John's now renovated home, watching the sun dip below the mountains, Victoria turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder if we've done enough?" she asked softly. John smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I think we've done what we can, and maybe that's all anyone can ask for." "You're right," Victoria replied, her voice tinged with warmth. "But I'm glad we did it together." In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the knowledge of all they'd accomplished, both felt an overwhelming sense of peace. They had taken vastly different paths to arrive at this point, but their shared mission had united them in ways neither could have predicted. Years later, when John's grandchildren played in the yard, and Victoria spoke at universities about the importance of giving back, the story of their unlikely partnership continued to inspire. It was proof that even in a world often divided by wealth, status, and circumstance, acts of kindness could bridge the widest gaps. That sometimes all it took was one moment, one decision, to set off a ripple effect of change. And so, The tale of the broke single dad and the billionaire woman became more than just a story. It became a reminder that no matter who we are or where we come from, we all have the power to make a difference. All it takes is a willingness to help and the courage to believe in the goodness of others. Days turned into weeks, and life in John Harper's small house returned to its usual rhythm. The storm that had brought Victoria Langley into their lives became a distant memory, like the remnants of a dream that lingered only in fleeting moments. Emma and Liam occasionally asked about the princess, as they still called her, but John didn't have much to tell them. He hadn't heard from Victoria since that snowy morning when she'd left with promises of gratitude and little else. Still, something about the encounter stayed with him. It wasn't just the image of her standing by the fireplace, or the way she'd laughed at Emma's innocent questions. It was the way she'd looked at him, as if seeing something valuable in a man who often felt invisible. Most people saw John as a mechanic, a single dad struggling to make ends meet. But for a brief moment, Victoria had seen more than that. She'd seen kindness, strength, and resilience. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself unable to shake the image of John's home. The warmth of the fire, the laughter of his children, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. Back in her high-rise office, surrounded by sleek furniture and endless spreadsheets, she felt out of place. Her days blurred together in a haze of meetings, phone calls, and deadlines, yet none of it filled the void she now realized existed within her. For all her success, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly connected to another human being. One evening, as she sat alone in her penthouse overlooking the city lights, Victoria pulled out her laptop and began typing notes. Ideas spilled onto the screen, thoughts about community programs, scholarships for struggling families, and initiatives to support single parents. Each idea stemmed from the same source, John Harper. His selflessness, his dedication to his children, and his ability to find joy in simplicity inspired her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Determined to act, Victoria reached out to her assistant and instructed her to arrange a meeting with local leaders in John's town. Under the guise of expanding her company's charitable efforts, she poured resources into creating a foundation aimed at helping families like John's. The first project, a fully equipped mobile repair van designed to assist mechanics working in underserved areas. Inside the van were state-of-the-art tools, safety gear, and even a small office space for managing invoices and client appointments. When the van arrived at the community center where John volunteered, he was speechless. Painted on its side was a simple yet powerful message, empowering hardworking families. Beneath it was a note addressed to him personally, for someone who truly understands the value of giving. Thank you for reminding me what matters most. John stared at the van, his heart pounding with disbelief. Who could have done this? And why? He thought back to Victoria's parting words and wondered if she might be behind it. But no, it seemed impossible. Why would a woman like her, someone so far removed from his world, care enough to do something like this? Despite his doubts, John couldn't deny the impact the gift would have. With the van, he could take on more clients, earn a better income, and spend less time worrying about how to provide for Emma and Liam. More importantly, he could use it to help others in his community who were struggling just like him. The van wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. That night, as John tucked his children into bed, he told them about the mysterious donation. Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. Maybe it was the princess, she exclaimed. She came back to say thank you. Liam nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, Daddy. You're a superhero, remember? Superheroes always get surprises. John chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Well, whoever it was, we'll make sure to use this gift wisely. It's not every day miracles happen. As he turned off the light and closed the bedroom door, John felt a renewed sense of hope. Life was still hard, and challenges loomed ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. And somewhere across the country, Victoria smiled to herself, knowing she'd taken the first step toward repaying a debt of gratitude that money alone could never cover. The launch of Harper's Hope marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for John Harper, but for countless families across the country who found themselves struggling to keep their lives afloat. With Victoria's resources and John's first-hand experience, the foundation quickly gained momentum, offering programs that addressed the unique challenges faced by single parents. From job training workshops to childcare subsidies, financial literacy classes to mental health support groups, Harper's Hope became a lifeline for those who had nowhere else to turn. John threw himself into the work, balancing his roles as a father, mechanic, and now director of the foundation. It wasn't easy. There were late nights spent drafting proposals, early mornings meeting with donors, and endless phone calls coordinating logistics, but he never felt more fulfilled. Each success story fueled him, reminding him why he had agreed to take on such a monumental task. One of the first initiatives they launched was a mentorship program pairing experienced tradespeople with single parents looking to learn skilled labor jobs. John personally oversaw this effort, teaching participants everything from engine repair to carpentry. He loved watching the transformation in his students, the way their confidence grew as they mastered new skills and realized they could provide for their families without relying on dead-end jobs or handouts. Emma and Liam became unofficial mascots of the foundation, often accompanying John to events or lending a hand around the office. Emma designed flyers for fundraising campaigns, while Liam proudly handed out toolkits to graduates of the mentorship program. Their involvement brought joy to everyone involved, proving that even children could play a role in making the world a better place. Meanwhile, Victoria watched John thrive with a mix of pride and admiration. She had always known he was capable of greatness, but seeing it unfold before her eyes was something else entirely. His humility, determination, and unwavering compassion inspired her in ways she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, she felt truly connected to a cause, and to a person, that made her life feel meaningful beyond wealth and status. Their partnership blossomed into a deep friendship rooted in mutual respect. They spent hours brainstorming ideas, reviewing budgets, and celebrating victories big and small. Over time, Victoria began opening up about her own struggles, the pressure of living up to expectations, the loneliness of being at the top, the fear of never feeling enough. John listened without judgment, offering advice born from years of navigating his own hardships. "You've already done so much good," he told her one evening as they sat in her office overlooking the city lights. "Don't forget that your worth isn't tied to what you achieve. Sometimes it's enough just to show up and care." His words stayed with her long after their conversation ended, planting seeds of self-reflection she hadn't allowed herself to explore before. In helping others through Harper's Hope, Victoria discovered a profound sense of fulfillment she'd been missing all along. As the months passed, the foundation's impact rippled outward, touching lives far beyond what either John or Victoria had imagined. Single mothers returned to school and earned degrees. Fathers retrained for careers that provided stability for their kids. Entire communities came together to support one another. The gratitude poured in, letters, emails, and heartfelt messages thanking John and Victoria for giving them hope when they needed it most. But perhaps the greatest reward was the bond between John and his children. With the foundation providing a steady income and newfound purpose, John no longer worried about scraping by. He could focus on creating memories with Emma and Liam, taking them on weekend trips, enrolling them in extracurricular activities, and simply being present in ways he hadn't always been able to before. One crisp autumn afternoon, as John stood on stage at a community event honoring Harper's Hope, he looked out at the crowd and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Beside him, Victoria smiled warmly, her presence a constant reminder of how far they'd come since that snowy night years ago. Together, they had turned a chance encounter into a movement, a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and human connection. And though neither of them knew exactly what the future held, one thing was certain: they had created something extraordinary. something that would continue to change lives for generations to come. Life moved forward for John Harper, but the mysterious arrival of the mobile repair van became a turning point he couldn't ignore. At first, he was hesitant to use it, almost as if accepting such generosity made him feel unworthy. But necessity soon outweighed pride. With bills piling up and winter approaching again, John realized he had no choice but to embrace the gift and the opportunities it brought. The van transformed his work in ways he hadn't imagined. No longer confined to the garage, John could travel to neighboring towns, helping people who otherwise wouldn't have access to affordable repairs. Farmers with broken tractors, elderly neighbors with unreliable cars, and young families struggling to keep their vehicles running, all benefited from his skill and the tools the van provided. Word spread quickly, and before long, John's schedule was fuller than ever. But what surprised him most wasn't the increase in clients. It was the sense of purpose the van gave him. For years, he'd viewed his job as simply a means to survive. Now, it felt like more, a way to make a difference, however small, in the lives of others. Every time someone thanked him or shared how his work had helped them, John felt a warmth that no paycheck could buy. Emma and Liam noticed the change too. Their dad seemed lighter, happier, even though he was working harder than before. They loved riding along in the van on weekends, watching him fix engines and chatting with customers. Emma often drew pictures of the van, adding rainbows and stars around it, while Liam declared it the coolest superhero car ever. Despite the business, John couldn't stop thinking about Victoria. Was she responsible for the van? If so, why? He replayed their brief encounter in his mind. The way she'd looked at him, the gratitude in her voice. But nothing added up. Why would someone like her care about someone like him? Meanwhile, Victoria Langley wrestled with her own thoughts. Back in her world of luxury hotels and private jets, she found herself haunted by memories of John's modest home. The simplicity of his life contrasted sharply with her own, where wealth insulated her from hardship but left her feeling hollow. She admired his strength, his ability to find joy despite adversity, and the unconditional love he gave his children. These were qualities money couldn't buy, yet they were the very things she craved most. Determined to reconnect, Victoria decided to host a gala benefiting rural communities, a cause close to her heart since meeting John. Invitations were sent out across the country, including one addressed to John Harper. When the envelope arrived in his mailbox weeks later, John stared at it in disbelief. A formal invitation printed on thick cardstock invited him to attend an event hosted by none other than Victoria Langley herself. Confused and curious, John debated whether to go. He didn't own a suit, let alone know how to behave at a fancy gala. What could she possibly want with him? Still, something inside urged him to accept. Borrowing a jacket from a friend and polishing his only pair of dress shoes, John prepared to step into a world entirely foreign to him. On the night of the gala, John walked into a grand ballroom filled with glittering chandeliers, elegant gowns, and tuxedo-clad guests sipping champagne. He felt completely out of place, gripping the edges of his borrowed jacket as he scanned the crowd for Victoria. Then she appeared, dressed in a stunning gown, her presence commanding attention. Yet when she spotted John, her face lit up with genuine delight. "John," she called, weaving through the crowd to greet him. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted, smiling nervously. "This isn't exactly my scene." Victoria laughed softly. "It's not mine either, not really. But tonight is special. You'll see why." As the evening unfolded, Victoria took the stage to deliver a speech about giving back to communities in need. To John's astonishment, she spoke directly about him, how his kindness during a snowstorm had inspired her to create programs supporting struggling families. The room erupted in applause as she publicly thanked him, calling him a true hero. John stood frozen, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in his life, he realized his actions mattered, not just to his family, but to the world. And as Victoria stepped down from the stage to join him, he knew this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The gala felt like a dream to John Harper, one he wasn't sure he deserved to be part of. As Victoria wrapped up her speech, the room filled with applause, and John found himself at the center of attention, a place he had never imagined being. People approached him, shaking his hand and thanking him for inspiring such meaningful change. Some shared their own stories of struggle, while others simply expressed admiration for his humility and strength. It was overwhelming, but in a way that made him feel seen for the first time in years. When the crowd finally dispersed, Victoria led John to a quiet corner of the ballroom, where they could talk without interruption. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something deeper, almost like respect. "I know this must feel surreal," she began, her voice soft but steady. "But I wanted you to see the impact you've had, not just on me, but on so many people." John shook his head, still trying to process everything. "Victoria, I didn't do anything special. I just helped someone who needed it. That's all." "That's exactly why it's special," she replied firmly. "You didn't expect anything in return. You acted out of kindness, not obligation. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, John had believed his life was defined by what he lacked: money, stability, time for himself. But now, standing here surrounded by strangers who called him a hero, he realized his worth wasn't tied to material things. It came from the choices he made, the love he gave his children, and the moments when he chose to help others despite his own struggles. As the night wore on, Victoria surprised him with another revelation. "I want to offer you something," she said carefully, gauging his reaction. "It's not charity, I promise. It's a partnership. I'd like you to run a foundation aimed at supporting single parents across the country. Someone with your experience and heart would be perfect for it." John blinked, stunned. "Me? Run a foundation? Victoria, I'm just a mechanic. I don't know the first thing about running something like that." "You're more than just anything," she countered gently. "Think about it. You understand what these families are going through because you've lived it. You can relate to them in a way no one else can. And besides, I'll be there every step of the way to guide you." For a moment, John didn't respond. The weight of her proposal settled over him, both exciting and terrifying. He thought about Emma and Liam, about the sacrifices he'd made to give them a better life. Could he really take on something this big? Would it even work? But then he remembered the faces of the people he'd helped since receiving the van. The farmer who cried tears of relief when his truck was fixed. The young mother who hugged him after he repaired her car seat. These were moments that reminded him why he did what he did. If partnering with Victoria meant creating opportunities for others to experience the same hope he'd been given, how could he say no? "I'll think about it," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "But if I agree, it won't just be for me. It'll be for everyone out there who needs a second chance." Victoria smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "That's all I ask." Over the next few weeks, John wrestled with the decision. He talked to Emma and Liam, explaining what Victoria had offered and asking for their thoughts. To his surprise, they were thrilled. "You should totally do it, Daddy," Emma exclaimed, bouncing excitedly. "You'll be helping so many people." Even Liam chimed in, holding up his toy wrench. "Yeah, Daddy, you're already a superhero. This'll make you an extra superhero." Their enthusiasm gave John the courage to accept Victoria's offer. Together, they began laying the groundwork for the foundation, combining her resources and connections with his first-hand knowledge of hardship. They named it Harper's Hope, a nod to John's journey and the message they wanted to send. No matter how tough life gets, there's always hope. As plans unfolded, John noticed a shift in himself. The doubts and insecurities that had once weighed him down started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream, not just for his family, but for countless others who deserved a brighter future. And as he worked alongside Victoria, he realized something else. Their bond went beyond gratitude or admiration. It was built on mutual trust, shared values, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark extraordinary change. The warmth of the small house seemed to wrap around Victoria like a comforting blanket, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Everything about John's home was simple: the worn furniture, the mismatched plates in the kitchen cabinet, the faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. But there was an undeniable charm to it. It wasn't the kind of charm that came from expensive decor or polished surfaces. It was the kind that grew naturally from love and care. Even the imperfections felt intentional, as if they told a story. As John handed her a steaming mug of hot cocoa, Victoria noticed how his hands were calloused from years of hard work. They weren't the hands of someone who had taken the easy path in life, but they were strong. Hands that had built, fixed, and provided for others. She found herself wondering what it must be like to live so selflessly, without the luxury of time for oneself. In her world, people hired assistants to handle even the smallest tasks, yet here was John, juggling 2 jobs, raising 2 children, and still finding room in his heart to help a complete stranger stranded in a snowstorm. "Do you always take in random people off the road?" Victoria asked with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. John chuckled, leaning back against the counter. "Not usually, no. But when I saw your car stuck out there, I figured you'd freeze before morning if I didn't stop. Guess my mama raised me right." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, sipping her cocoa. There was something disarming about John's honesty. He didn't speak in riddles or hide behind pretenses. He said exactly what he meant, and he did exactly what he believed was right. It was refreshing, almost startling, compared to the carefully calculated conversations she was used to having in boardrooms and charity galas. Just then, Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit under one arm. Her bare feet patted softly against the wooden floor as she approached Victoria cautiously. "Are you staying for Christmas?" she asked, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. Victoria hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I'm not sure," she admitted gently. "But thank you for letting me stay tonight. Your daddy saved me from a very cold night." Emma grinned proudly, glancing at John. "My daddy's a superhero," she declared. "He fixes everything." John rolled his eyes playfully, though there was a hint of pride in his expression. "All right, Miss Storyteller, bedtime's long overdue. Say good night to our guest." "Good night," Emma chirped, giving Victoria a little wave before scampering back down the hallway. Moments later, Liam's sleepy voice drifted through the house as he called out, "Night, Princess." Victoria laughed softly, shaking her head. "Princess, huh? I think your kids have quite the imagination." "They do," John agreed, smiling fondly. "Keeps things interesting around here." For a while, they sat together in comfortable silence, the crackling fire filling the gaps between words. Victoria watched as John moved around the room, tidying up toys and folding blankets with practiced ease. Every action seemed purposeful, every gesture rooted in love for his family. It was a stark contrast to her own life, where efficiency often replaced emotion and relationships were more transactional than heartfelt. Finally, unable to resist any longer, Victoria asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "How do you do it, John? How do you keep going when things get tough?" John paused, considering her words. "It's not easy," he admitted after a moment. "Some days, it feels like the world's stacked against you. But then I look at my kids. They're counting on me. And I remind myself that I've got 2 choices: give up or keep fighting. Giving up isn't an option." His answer struck a chord deep within Victoria. For all her wealth and success, she couldn't remember the last time she'd faced genuine hardship, or the last time she'd relied solely on her own strength to overcome it. Her victories were measured in dollars and deals, not in moments of resilience or acts of kindness. Sitting here in this humble home, surrounded by laughter and warmth, she realized just how empty some parts of her life truly were. By the time the storm began to subside in the early hours of the morning, Victoria knew she couldn't leave without expressing her gratitude. Standing by the door as John handed her coat back, she turned to him with sincerity in her eyes. "You've given me more than shelter tonight, John. You've reminded me of what really matters. I won't forget this." John smiled, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "Just glad I could help. Safe travels, Miss Langley." As Victoria stepped outside into the crisp winter air, she glanced back at the modest,